Reading, waiting for an interview for a job I knew I wasn't qualified for. But I was desperate. You see, it was the week before Christmas. And just 2 weeks earlier, I'd been made redundant for the first time in my life in an unceremonious manner that left me a little bit bewildered, a little bit bemused, and feeling extremely low in my room. You see, I was the breadwinner of a family with a 5-year-old and 4-year-old. Actually, I should have remembered their names. The numbers were. The names were David and Neil, but nevertheless. And I felt as a breadwinner of a family, I was a failure. As I was called into the office, the interview went just as I expected. Within 5 minutes, the manager knew I wasn't qualified for the job. But here's the thing. He spent the next few minutes building me up. He started asking questions. He asked me about my previous successes, my achievements, the things I loved doing, the things I was natural at, my natural strengths and talents. I walked in feeling really low. I'm not that tall anyway. But I walked out on cloud 9. So much so that I got home, my wife was amazed at the difference straight away. But within 2 hours, I had a phone call from a company. A recruitment agency put in touch, said they'd give me a call, and so they did. And in a just very short time, this sales manager said, "You sound just the sort of guy I'm looking for. You're so sure of yourself, so confident, I'd like to offer you a job. Can you come in tomorrow and discuss?" I had a job offer before Christmas. The difference the experience makes. Now, I've been in customer-facing roles just about all of my life, and I know 2 things to be true. Service is remembered long after price is forgotten. And we always remember the experience when it was an emotional experience. I remember the redundancy and that job interview over 30 years ago, and I remember them just as though it was yesterday. We always remember that. I'm going to talk about how you can develop a secret Salesforce through the experience, because I believe that every interaction is a moment of truth. And it's the moment of truth that makes the customer experience. I also believe although the customer experience encompasses a broad range, it's those people interactions that have the biggest impact on you. In an organisation, I consider there are 3 typical characters. There's what I might call the ambassador. On the other hand, there's what I might call the saboteur. And there's the vast majority in the middle, the neutrals. By the way, I remember doing a workshop to a charity a while ago and thought, well, you probably don't have saboteurs. And they said, oh yes, we do. I was amazed at that. But every organisation is going to have a combination of those 3. So I'll briefly talk about what they are and then talk about some principles of how you can develop ambassadors, because the Secret Salesforce is about ambassadors, not saboteurs. Ambassadors, these are people who drive the business forward. They encompass the vision of the business. They are people focused. They're the people you love being around. They're cheerful, they're energetic, and they really believe in the vision of the organisation. Saboteurs, they're self-focused. It's all about them. They don't like what they are. They're not fussed about the organisation. They have no pride in it. They don't believe in the vision or purpose. They can be the energy suckers from a room. Have you thought about who's the energy sucker in your organisation or people you know? Can you recall any? And by the way, if you can't, it's probably you. The neutrals fit in right in the middle, and they cover a wide range between the saboteurs and the ambassadors. And they can tend to be more jobs worth than just focusing on the job, task focused. I'll cover these a bit more in more detail a bit later. But I'm going to talk about 5 principles that will help to develop an ambassador. And I'll put them all up here. The principles of respect, empowerment, communication, culture, and engagement. And if you like acronyms, I don't necessarily. We got Recce for short. Recce fits because, as you'll see from the next slide, I have a military background and reconnaissance tends to fit into it. So let's look at respect, the first one. Now, if you look very closely, in the middle row, you can just see a hat sticking up. I believe that's me. Hidden behind the others. Taken a long time ago. So you're probably thinking, why am I bringing up a military parade referring to respect? Well, respect. In the military, you show respect amongst other ways by saluting. You salute the officer, but actually you're not saluting the officer. You're saluting the position, the rank they hold, the office they hold. And on that parade, we are saluting the officer marching past. That officer salutes back. And if you're in uniform and you pass them anywhere else, in the barracks, in the streets, you're supposed to salute them, and they are duty bound to salute back. It is two-way. Respect is always two-way. If it isn't, things fall down. You have to respect and trust the officer. And they have to trust that you will respect them and follow them out. So respect has to be earned both ways. You have to respect your mates and trust them, because if you don't, it can be lethal. You respect your mates, or muckers as we used to call them at the time. And if you put the right mix in, if you put the right training, the right ingredients, just like cooking, here's one I made earlier. So they turn out something like that 40 odd years later, and the respect is still there. How does that fit into the corporate environment? Let me take you back when I used to work at IBM. In maintenance and technical support services, that was about 1,100 strong at the time, that division. Bigger than most UK companies, and certainly a lot bigger than the PSA. And they lost one of their major customers, one of their top 5, the Pareto rule. I've heard lots of figures bandied around, that doesn't matter. But they lost a big chunk of revenue, and there were a lot of long faces. Now this was a catalyst for change, because they brought someone in to do some sales training. He was actually a consultant, he wasn't a trainer. He was a professional negotiator who used to negotiate against IBM on behalf of their customers, and did the same against HP and other companies on a no-win, no-fee. And his basis was he would just try to reduce the contract price. And he took a cut of what he saved. The interesting thing was, he did a role play. He demonstrated how he used to work. And in this role play, he pointed out that he would get the customer to prime the receptionist that the salesperson wasn't expecting. He wouldn't offer them a coffee, and when they go in the room, he'd tell the customer, you don't speak at all, I do all the talking. And he said the salesman would walk in, hands outstretched, smiling, and he wouldn't look up from the books below. And just looking down, he'd say, it's too expensive. Everything was really underhand and nasty to put them off balance. It was quite fun actually on this role play, because I used to be an ex-engineer, so seeing a salesman, I see these experienced salespeople coming out of that role play, white-faced and shaking. And I thought, yes, I got my own back. But at the end of that program, the morale of the sales went up and things started to improve. I was asked to design and develop a customer care program for all the engineers and the help desk. Now with IBM, you always have a sponsor. The sponsor's there to, as a manager, to help organise and see things through, and they want to make sure it fits what they want. So I made 3 requests. The first was that it was off-site, 2 days off-site, and we held it in Warwick. The second was that I wanted a line manager on every course. They liked that because they thought, oh, it's keeping control of people. I liked it because it meant they could become advocates to go out and tell the others, and that's why I asked for it. But it was the third request. It was actually that request, rather than just my training, that made the difference. I requested that we always had a C-level executive attend a part of the meeting, and they did. Every week throughout the year, an executive would come on the first day and spend 20 to 30 minutes. They'd drive to Warwick, whatever their schedule was, to come and meet the engineers. That was the biggest impact. Let me set the scene. IBM engineers used to be really experienced. They were really well qualified. They would contact the customers when there's a fault, build a liaison with them, build a relationship, diagnose what was wanted, order the parts, go to site, deal with it. That was then. Cost cutting changed the process. Suddenly, in a cost cutting exercise, a technical help desk did all the diagnosis, all the contacting the customer, all the relationships. The engineers became box swappers. What did that do to their morale? They would go to site, they would go on site, pick up, or go to stores, pick up the parts, go to site, fit the parts. If they worked, great, they'd leave. If they didn't work, it was a technical help desk that would get on the phone again to do the next bit of diagnosis, and it might be a different engineer who went to site with the next pass. There's no way, no knowing. There was no consistency, no continuity, no relationships, and the engineers felt they were just doing a dull job. I don't know if this is true, I'm told, because in IBM acronyms are used everywhere. And at one time someone told me they were going to call them action planning engineers. Have you worked out what that acronym stands for? It didn't happen. I don't know if it was thought about, but apparently someone realised quickly that it spelled ape, so it didn't get done. But just by going, talking to engineers, listening to their complaints, listening to all the things that were going wrong, and then the execs explaining their position and the challenges and the pressures they were under. And they could point out that yes, they turned the clock to there, they completed an app. They couldn't go right back. They weren't able to do just that, but they could give back some, and give back some autonomy. The engineers felt respected, listened to, empowered. And they were given a certain amount of empowerment again. At the end of that year, I'm reliably informed by the sponsor that the sales were back up, customer complaints were down, and the engineer morale survey was the highest ever on record. The power of respect. Does respect always have to be shown in a big corporate? I was in my local Costa recently. Well, actually, I'm always in my local Costa. I spend a lot in there. And this one time, a lady came in. Actually, a lady comes in every time, just about. But on this occasion, this lady came in and she asked for a pot of tea, English breakfast tea, and a tea cake. And the young lad, and they're all very young assistants there, but the young lad took the money, made the tea, and went to get the tea cake and discovered they'd run out. That lady was so disappointed, she said, don't worry, I'll just take my money. He refunded the money and offered her a free drink and a snack of her choice as an apology. I saw the change in her body language, how she felt so pleased. She took that offer. Now I spend at least £20 a week in my local Costa, so that's a lot of money in a year. Imagine if they really got me narked and I can go back there, how much they'd lose. See, it doesn't take much. It's about the ambassador is the person who steps up. And as you'll find out, I always believe an ambassador is always in service, in sales, and takes ownership, so they're in leadership. Actual fact, at Reading Station yesterday, a different Costa, so I had about 25 minutes to kill. This guy was so cheerful, he seemed to know a lot of his regular customers going through the station, he knew what drinks they wanted, he chatted a bit. It was irritating to me because I wanted to have a coffee to skip the train, but it was so engaging to watch the way he actually built that relationship. So that's the thing about respect. Let's look at empowerment, the second principle. My youngest son used to be a budding thespian. That means he was a waiter. And as a budding thespian, i.e. waiter, he rarely got much time off over Christmas. So this Christmas, he specified a very specific, expensive dressing gown that he wanted from John Lewis. No problem, I bought that. He came to me late on Christmas Eve night, and he had to go back to work. Early afternoon, I think it's the 1 o'clock session, in South London. But the dressing gown was a size too small. So I get up on the morning of the 27th, scrape the ice of the car, drive into Reading, park up, walk into Broad Street, into John Lewis on the first day of the sales. Who here enjoys going into a crowded shop on the first day of the sales? I don't. I forced my way through. It was wall-to-wall people and hot and stuffy. And I saw a sign that said no refunds or exchanges until the new year.
Oh, no.
Undeterred though, I just kept going, and I found an assistant on her own. So I went up to her and explained the situation. She gave me a cold, stony stare. Oh, here we go. But then she listened. At the end, she smiled and said, "Let me see what I can do. Wait here." Now, I wondered if that was a fob off because I was waiting for a few minutes. But she came down a few minutes later with the right size dressing gown, and I felt elated until I looked at the huge queues at every till and thought I'd have to explain to another assistant who might refuse to help. She looked at me, she looked right inside my head, I think, and she knew exactly what I was thinking. Took me to an unused till, opened it, dealt with the transaction, and wished me a happy new year. And was that lady in sales? Was she in service? Or was she in leadership? She was an ambassador, a true ambassador. An ambassador always steps up and fits into all roles. And I truly believe you don't sell, you serve. Selling is about serving. And this is where the customer experience comes in. Let's ask you, working here, I'll wind that off a moment. Maybe I won't. Have you ever run out of fuel on a motorway before? I've got close and I watched the gauge and I thought, it's running on air, thin air, don't ask me how. I have run out of fuel in a road in Reading, luckily once. And luckily, because it was only about a quarter to half mile from the garage, I could walk there, get a jerry can, top up, and get home. What would it be like if you ran out of fuel at 41,000 feet over Red Lake, Ontario? July the 23rd, 1983, Air Canada Flight 143 ran out of fuel. First one engine spluttered, then the other, at 41,000 feet over Red Lake, Ontario, on a flight between Edmonton and Montreal, but having a stopover at Ottawa, so to take off from there. Why was that? How could that possibly happen? Well, it was down to human error on two factors. First of all, Air Canada were just in the process of switching from imperial to metric measurements. The second was just a bit of a coincidence. They also happened to have a known problem with the fuel gauge system, and there had been a fix with it by disabling one circuit breaker and also then doing a double check by measuring with a dipstick to see what the fuel load was. I've always wondered, how do you feel if you saw the captain scrambling up and putting a dipstick? I've often wondered about that. I mean, obviously that would be an accountant. But they did that, the ground crew did that, and they then used a conversion factor to convert it and the weight into pounds, not kilograms. And the flight crew did the check with them, or did the conversion check, and agreed. So they loaded 22,300 pounds of fuel instead of 22,300 kilograms. Half, less than half, the amount of fuel required, even with emergency contingency. Okay, just imagine, you're sitting in that aircraft and you hear it suddenly goes silent. How would you be feeling if suddenly, it would take you probably a few seconds or a while to think, what's happened here? And of course the captain came up, ladies and gentlemen, don't worry, we just lost both engines. I'm just wondering how you'd feel, because of course they take it in their stride, they don't try to create panic. Well, there were several factors that worked in their favour as it happened that day. Captain Pearson was a very experienced pilot, and so was his co-pilot, Captain Quinlan, I think it was. But Captain Pearson also happened to be an experienced glider pilot. Not that to that date, no jetliner had ever done a glide land, ever. nevertheless, those skills came in. Also, the nearest airfield was an ex-Canadian, I keep trying to go RAF, but it's not, Canadian Air Force Base, Gimli, which was now disused and being used as a racetrack. So they could divert, though, to Gimli. Captain Quinlan, the co-pilot, had trained at the Canadian Air Force Base in Gimli, so he knew the runway. But on this day, it just happened to be a race event on that line. Now, when an aircraft runs out of fuel, there is no power. They've lost all power, and they lost 90% of their hydraulics. So they were coming into land with an event going on, with no noise to warn the people it was happening, and no flaps working to slow them down. It's reported that Captain Pearson said, as he flew over, he could see into the eyes of two terrified teenagers looking up to see this jet not that far above them coming down. Fortunately, again, the front landing wheels didn't lock properly, so the nose dipped and it scraped on the runway, which aided the braking because the flaps weren't working and they were coming in far too fast. They managed to land without any fatalities, just minor injuries, various things like that. Now, the consequence was both Captain Pearson and Captain Quinlan were praised for their professional skills in achieving that. And both they and the ground crew were reprimanded and I think suspended for a few months for the error in the first place. A bit of pros and cons. Consider how often we make assumptions in our businesses. Just consider the impact those assumptions have on your customers, your teams, your suppliers, your contractors, and even in your friends. It is so easy to make assumptions. And whose responsibility is it to make sure it's understood? Let me give another example, by the way. As you noticed, I was in the military. At one time, we were doing exercises at a place called Batters, British Army Training Unit, Suffield. Anyone who's in ex-military know it. The only place in the world at the time that they had live rounds, artillery and tanks firing over troops while things were carried out. I was in the only vehicle, or before that, let me say this, I have a distinction, single-handedly, of stopping a live military battle. Yeah, proud of that. I stopped a battle. I was in the only vehicle that didn't have a radio. And I always had to follow others. So on this occasion I've been following, and we got to a checkpoint and waited around, and then the military police said, follow that vehicle, and I did. Apparently I followed the wrong vehicle. I wonder why the guns went silent, and after a while you think it, but it was some 45 minutes later when I get to this other unit, and I got a right reprimand for, everyone was looking for me, they stopped the whole battle, it was costing all this money, blah, blah. And I said, well, I knew where I was. But so yes, assumptions. I assumed that was the one I had to go for. That was my fault. The military police assumed they told me correctly. That could have been fatal, or me perhaps, but it shows what happens when you make assumptions, when you do not communicate. And communication is, in business, one of the top factors, the most important factors. Okay, let's look at the third point, culture. It was about 3 months ago, I was walking past Piccadilly and I thought, Ritz-Carlton, I've just read something about them. If you look on their website, they say their term is, we are ladies and gentlemen who serve ladies and gentlemen. And I just love that phrase. And they say, our ladies and gentlemen are our most important resource in serving our guests. I'm a firm believer that in employee first, customer second, shareholder third. Because if the employee is treated as first with respect, they provide the service to the customer pleases the shareholders. That's my reasoning. So they have various mottos like that, and that's their basis motto. John Lewis had a similar type of motto in many things. Do what's right, collaborate, do what's right, follow the management guidelines, but do what is right for the customer. And did that lady do the right thing for me? She certainly did. My one regret actually is I didn't make a note of her name, and I've regretted that ever since. But I've told this story now over 400 or 500 times, and I will keep telling it. But have you heard of Zappos? They're known as one of the top customer experience companies in the world. They're known that way. They got bought out by Amazon in 2009, but they still run autonomously. Tony Tsai, I can never pronounce H-S-I-E-H. How do you pronounce that name? Shay, thank you. Tony Shay brought in various things, but amongst others, he wanted it to be a fun environment. They actually have a happiness department. Isn't that fantastic? A happiness department. Their 10 core values, and I think 10 is too many, but the 10 core values were totally created by the staff, by the teams, people themselves. They have a system, which Amazon I believe have taken up as well since, is after the induction period is over, they bring the employee in and offer them, it used to be $3,000 there and then, I think it might be more now, to leave there and then, take the money and leave. But if you take the money, you could never work in any associated company ever again in your life. Because they only wanted people who buy in to the attitude, to buy in to the vision and the goals and the practicalities. They recruit on attitude, not aptitude. And that's what they want. The culture is there. A personal story on culture. Because corporate culture, I believe, is about living, it's practicing and living the values, the vision and the beliefs. It's living it. It's not just about the values. It's about living it and living the beliefs and practicing it. I worked at a company called Infotron, and it was 1989 when my wife was terminal. And I spent the last month of her life looking after her and my children, full time at home being paid. At the end of that, I was still looking after the children full time. And they had names, they did have names, not just numbers. They were 8 and 9 then. But it was a difficult time. And I still recall my manager phoned me up and asked me, Steve, what are your plans? I had absolutely no idea. I was a field service engineer at the time. I thought, how do I do this? He said, don't worry, look, I'm going to come down and have a chat with you off the records in the pub, and we'll see how we can support you. Because Infotron always, their values were always about the people. They always back their people up, come what may, and I saw many other examples. They lived the values. He came and saw me, and he said, listen, if you can come back for just 2 or 3 hours a day, I can cover you indefinitely. And I don't want your kids to be first in the playground. I felt so valued and respected. But they lived the culture. The culture was, yes, do what's right for the customer. The culture was always about our people are our resource. The culture was all about enjoying the work, and it was fun working in a London office over there. They lived the culture. The culture is what buys people into you. They buy into your whole process. I was so lucky, I think, to have worked for that company, because actually I had a choice before I worked there. There was another company who I'd been for an interview for. They didn't offer me the job quick enough. So as it happened, I took this one, which was such a result for me. The last point I want to make is about engagement. What does engagement mean to you? Consider today, there's a lot of buzzword around that, isn't there? People think, oh, it's that same old stuff, employee engagement, oh, yeah. Today, resilience is more important, about diversity, inclusion. But if you don't have an engaged workforce, how motivated are they? This whole talk is about developing ambassadors, developing those magic moments of truth. How do you do that if your people are not 100% engaged? So I mentioned earlier about the 3 levels, the ambassador, the saboteur, the neutral. I also going to talk briefly in customer experience. There's a measuring process, a survey called Net Promoter Score. I don't know if you've come across that term. I'm not a fan of it, but in essence it asks one basic question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend our company or this product or service to someone else? 9 and 10, advocates, and they give a positive score. 7 and 8 are neutrals, and they don't count at all. 1 to 6 are detractors and give a negative score. Now, I don't like it for several reasons. One, I think in the UK, I think in America they're more likely to go higher level, give 9s and 10s more frequently. UK, not many people like giving 10 out of 10, but there you go. Also, if you're in the honeymoon period of a new product or service, if things have gone reasonably smooth, then you're going to give a higher grade than maybe 2 years down the line when you've got used to it. But now if I imagine, not so much a survey, but just imagine you were judging your people on a scale of 1 to 10 as to how well engaged they were. I consider the 1s and 2s to be actively disengaged. And just as a matter of interest, Gallup, the 2007 Gallup survey of the American workforce, admittedly the American ones, said that 16% of the workforce were actively disengaged. But 51% were not engaged, and at 33 were engaged. I'm going to turn it around in a different way, where I think it makes, to me, it fits more sensibly. And I'm going to talk about the actively disengaged at the bottom. These are your saboteurs. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, these are the 1s and 2s perhaps. What are they like now? They are the people who just do not want to be involved at all. They're not interested. I'm going to give an example. Actually, a fellow PSA member who posted on Facebook about a year ago talked about an experience when he went in to buy a mattress topping in a retail store. And although he does a lot online, there's a hell of a lot online, he wanted to go in and see it and feel it and get the information on it. And he went in and he saw these two young salesmen just chatting amongst themselves, ignoring customers. So he asked them where the bedding things was, where the toppings were. And they simply said, oh, over there. He asked again, well, where's the information on it? How do I get information? Oh, it's all over there. He was a little bit irritated. So he asked them, do you actually work here? And they simply replied, if you don't like it, you can go to the store across the road. That's what he posted on Facebook. Apparently he did, and that store was slightly better, but they didn't hold stock in there. They said you can look online. So he went home and looked online, on Amazon. Retail in a time of challenge lost customers. And by the way, those who don't know, that was Frank Furness, who posted that over a year ago. I have other examples of saboteurs. But these are the people that are just not interested. It's not only a job, they don't want the job, they just want the paycheck. But then you get what I call the partly engaged. The partly engaged are your probably 3, 4, 5s, so they're at the lower end, but they're not actively disengaged. Partly engaged means they'll do the job when they're being watched. It's a paycheck really only, it's a job, they're job's worth. They're purely job's worth people. They're not dissing the company or putting it down, they're not that bad, but they're not motivated. How good is that when you talk to other customers, suppliers, contractors? And can your suppliers and contractors talk to other customers? And if you're not motivated or your people are not engaged talking to them, what will they say about your people to others, to other companies? So these are the partly engaged. They're doing a job, and it's fine, they're paid to do a job. Sometimes it'll be done well, sometimes it won't. But the next level is what I call mostly engaged. These are good, solid performers. They do the job, they do it well. They are what I call, they're task focused, not people focused. So by being task focused, they'll just do the task, they'll do it to their ability, but they can lose sight of the big picture. And actually, they can be unknowing saboteurs, as can the partly engaged. They can be unknowing saboteurs because they believe they're doing their job. Accounts receivable could be chasing up minor invoices and irritating the customer the way they're doing it. Because it's about how you engage, how enjoyable you are to work with. What's your motivation behind there? Are you showing that passion to the business? Are you living the practice and the beliefs and the values and beliefs and attitudes of the company? And they will be a lot of the time, especially if they're given a project they really like, then they'll go all out. If they're giving them their routine projects, it's just a job. Solid performers. Just consider the book, Jim Collins, From Good to Great. He refers to a phrase in there, good is the enemy of great. And as speakers, isn't that the same as well? Yeah, we're going to be just good enough, or we aim to always improve, always get better. Good is the enemy of great. And I believe that these people can be the enemy of great performers and great employees, great teams. They're solid performers, but just solid, no extra. Looking around the room, many of you are far too young to remember the phrase, baker's dozen. You're all far too young for that. But this was when they used to, the baker would, you might buy 12 bread rolls, and the baker would throw an extra one in to spare for good measure to build relationships. The baker's dozen. This is what I think the ambassador, and I believe these are the neutrals, by the way. The partly and mostly engaged in neutrals, because they're just good is the enemy of great. It's not that extra baker's dozen attitude. But finally we come to the actively engaged, fully engaged, totally and fully engaged. These are your ambassadors. Rather like John, who works at the Travel Lodge. Totally engaged in what you do. Rather like that lady at John Lewis, who went over and above. People focused. Always people focused. So these are your ambassadors. And our aim is to always develop ambassadors. So we are aiming constantly to drive people from one level to another. And we have to think, what do we do to develop that? I mean, on the engagement side, there's several things. As a manager, we should be perhaps coaching, not managing, not spider management. We should be encouraging individuality. We should be empowering. We know we should be respecting. We know all of these things. But we are aiming to move from one to the other. Move all the way around. And this is what we aim for, to get a team of ambassadors. And this might sound like it's only for corporate companies, but I really believe these 5 principles come across the road everywhere. So you have to respect your customers, you have to demonstrate that. You have to respect your suppliers, your contractors. You have to empower those same people to make decisions on your behalf at times. And also, by the way, you need to empower yourself, because are there days when you feel perhaps less empowered than others, sure of yourself? It doesn't matter if you're managing a big team or just yourself, or you're managing suppliers. You have to think about these. Does your culture serve you, or does it serve the customers? I had another issue with the saboteur when I had a tank leak. My immersion tank leaked January last year, and I was going away on the weekend, always on the weekend, isn't it? I was going away to Bangor, of all places, Bangor in North Wales, to do some training for a week. So I had to leave my son to deal with it. Well, this company turned up 2 or 3 days late, and they simply said, needs a new tank. Well, the tank was had a 20 warranty, it was a stainless steel tank, being fitted 15 months earlier. The original plumber, his warranty was out of date, but the tank wasn't. And I did it through the insurance company. I thought, why pay if I don't need to? That's my logic. Yeah, that was a bad mistake. They simply said, we don't split the cost between parts and labour, £787. And I said, well, it's a new tank. Well, can I speak to the manager? The manager said the same, no, we don't split parts or labour. And I simply asked, does that mean that you don't know your own costs of what parts are costing you? And this manager simply said, thank you, and put the phone down on me. I complained to Direct Line. They upheld my complaints. They called me back when at my convenience on Saturday, so they were good. They paid me compensation, and they paid me the fee I paid for a plumber to come out and change a small seal at the top of the tank. and they were going, this other company were going to charge 787. Their convenience, their culture, not about me. And the other thing was they said, when our engineers in the area, yeah, sure, we'll give you half an hour's warning. Yeah, so my son had to take a taxi back from work to wait in for a few hours to turn up. The culture was suited for them. Consider how your culture is in your organisation. Who does it suit? You or the customer? So putting it all together, it's all about respect, empower, communicate, culture, and engage. And if you carry out these principles, you can develop a secret Salesforce by unlocking the resources in your teams. And you can reduce churn, increase retention, and build sales through service.